Hey guys, this past weekend I played a 2-day Scrabble tournament in Charlottesville, Virginia, and as some of you may already be aware, I did really well. I finished with an undefeated 15-0 record, which was enough to propel me back to the #1 Scrabble ranking in North America for the first time in about a year. So that was really cool, but I wasn't the only one who had a really good weekend of Scrabble in Charlottesville. In the second division, Merris Stambaugh won in similarly dominant fashion, winning 14 of his 15 games, losing just a single game. He played extremely well and gained almost 200 rating points in one event, which is almost unheard of. And the game I'm going to be showing you today is the game that Merris had to clinch the tournament. At this point in the tournament, Merris was up enough games on the field that if he could defeat veteran player Nancy Bowen in this game, he would clinch the tournament with 2 rounds to go. And he found himself in a pretty good position here. As you can see, he was up 84 points with a score of 378 to 294 and holding a rack of B, C, E, E, and R, S. However, Nancy has just made a really savvy play on her last turn, playing Crip to set up a potential front S-hook for Scrip. And from Merris's perspective, there was 1 tile in the bag. There were 8 tiles unseen to Merris, which you guys can see on the right, A, G, I, N, O, Q, R, S. So Merris knows that 7 of these tiles are on Nancy's rack, and 1 of these tiles is in the bag, but what he doesn't know is which is the 1 tile in the bag. And even though he's up a lot, he needs to be very careful, because the pool is a mix of really good bingo tiles and the dreaded Q. It's not hard to see that if Nancy has the Q, Merris is going to win this game handily, because she's clearly not going to be able to bingo, and she might even have a hard time playing it at all. So that means the one situation Merris needs to worry about is if the Q is in the bag. If the Q is in the bag, then by process of elimination, we know that Nancy has the 7 remaining tiles, namely A, G, I, N, O, R, S. And if that's her rack, she is threatening a bingo, namely Oregans and a Scrip. And if Merris is not careful and tries to just score enough points to outrun Nancy's bingo, then he's going to actually end up losing if she has that bingo, because Merris is going to draw the Q, and that's going to give Nancy an extra 20 bonus points when she plays out, because she'll be catching Merris with an unplayed Q. Let me show you an example of how this might play out. Let's say Merris were to play the word sec down the D column, hooking juts and YE for 24 points, which, if he's going to ignore the threat that Nancy just created, seems like a reasonable play. It scores well, and it gets rid of his C, which is one of the 3-point tiles he has, and ideally doesn't want to get caught with if Nancy bingoes out. Well, here's the thing. If Merris plays sec, he takes a large lead of 108 points. But Nancy's going to bingo out, like I said before, with Oregans and Scrip for 79. And she's still down 29 after her bingo, but she's going to get double the point value of Merris's B, E, N, Q, and R that are unplayed. If you do the math, that adds up to 16 times 2, or 32. So Nancy's going to add 32 points to her score and win this game by 3, 405 to 402. So, if there's a way for Merris to guarantee he wins, even if he draws the Q, it's not playing sec. Now, the next thing you might wonder is, what about trying to block? One idea that Merris could have to block is to use the fact that Vend takes a front E for event. And with that in mind, he could maybe try to play something like Neb, which scores very well, getting his B both ways on the triple letter score for 29 points. The problem with Neb is that while it does block Oregans and Scrip, Nancy's now going to have a different playable 7-letter bingo, namely Signora down the A column, hooking the A to make AN, and that's going to score even more than her other bingo. This is going to be 86 points, which brings the score to 380 to 407. But once again, Nancy would now be catching Merris with an unplayed Q that he would have just drawn after Neb along with his C, E, R, and S. And as before, Nancy is going to get 32 bonus points and win the game this time by 5, 412 to 407. Another potential blocking option for Merris might be to take advantage of the fact that he himself has an S he can use to make Scrip. So he could play something like Nebs and Scrip for 21 points. And it turns out that this play would win 100% of the time for Merris, because if he draws the Q, then Nancy is no longer going to have a playable bingo on the resulting board, since her 7s will no longer fit, and she wouldn't have any 8s that play through either the N or the E that Merris has just opened. However, this play is a little bit dicey to make in practice, because if Merris draws the Q, yes, Nancy won't be able to bingo, however, Merris is not going to have anywhere on this board he can play the Q, and he's going to end up stuck with it. It's not too hard to see that there are no I's available for Merris to drop the Q with QI, and the word at is also nowhere on the board for Merris to play QAT. And having a C, an E, and an R all tiles that don't really make any words with the Q without a U isn't going to help him. So what that means is that Nancy can slow play in the endgame and play off just 1 or 2 tiles at a time to try to rack up as many points as possible instead of going out quickly, because Merris at some point, once he gets rid of all of his tiles except for the Q, is going to have to keep passing. I've posted a couple other videos on my channel where we've seen Q sticks or other tile sticks in endgames result in very large swings, sometimes as much as 100 points. So in this position, could Nancy theoretically win if Merris were to draw the Q? I don't think so, because Nancy would be down 105 points, which is still quite a lot. So she'd need to make up 85 points because she would still be getting 20 from Merris's unplayed Q. But the thing is, Nancy wouldn't have any high-scoring tiles. She'd have only 1-point tiles besides the G. So it's going to be really hard for her to rack up a lot of points. So in practice, Nancy almost certainly would not be able to win. However, it's a bit uncomfortable to make this play knowing you could be deliberately Q-sticking yourself, and it's difficult to calculate for sure that Nancy wouldn't have a win. So if at all possible, Merris would like to avoid a line like this where he could be Q-sticking himself. But the problem is, with no Q spots on this board, it's going to be seemingly very difficult or impossible for Merris to make any sort of play that doesn't result in him being Q-stuck if he draws the Q. It's worth mentioning he has a much higher scoring play down the B column he could make, the fairly hard to see Rebex for 41, and this basically puts him in the same position as Nebs. It wouldn't allow any possible bingos for Nancy, but once again, if he draws the Q, he's going to get stuck with it. And as with Nebs, realistically, is Nancy going to have enough to win and make up this 120 or so point deficit? I really don't think so. But it could get a little dicey, and it's just something that would be better for Merris to avoid if he can do so. However, as I said before, it's very difficult because in this position, assuming the Q is in the bag, then if Merris plays any tiles, he's going to draw the Q, and there's not going to be anywhere for him to play it. However, there is a very sneaky way that Merris can ensure he doesn't draw the Q. And he finds it. In this position, Merris passed. And passing is an absolutely brilliant strategic decision by Merris here that guarantees himself the win without any of the added stress that some of the other lines we looked at before might pose because he would get Q-stuck. Here's the idea. It's first worth mentioning that Nancy, of course, cannot just pass back, because then Merris would pass back in return, and if we have 6 consecutive passes, the game ends on the spot, and Merris, of course, being up 84 points, would just win. So that means Nancy would have to make a play. If she already has the Q, then things aren't very interesting, because, as we said before, there is nowhere for her to play, just the Q on this board. So she'd either be stuck with it herself, in which case Merris, of course, wins easily, or maybe she'd be able to play QIS and Script, but if she did that, then she'd only have 5 tiles left and wouldn't be threatening a bingo, so Merris would, of course, win in the endgame quite handily. So the only interesting case to think about is the one we've been talking about all along: what if the Q is in the bag? Well, here's the catch. If Merris passes and the Q is still in the bag, then Nancy can, of course, still bingo with Script, but she's not bingoing out. There is still 1 tile in the bag, and of course, that tile is the dreaded Q. So, after Nancy bingo, it's now not Merris, but Nancy who draws the Q. And here, there will be 1 spot for Nancy to play the Q, namely with QI next to the I in Oregons. However, it's not hard for Merris to block that. He can literally do anything, even something as simple as in for 4, that blocks Nancy's Q spot, and then just play off tiles at his leisure and win the game by a lot. Or even more simple, Merris could actually just bingo out with Obscener from the O and win immediately. So, is this what happened? Well, sort of. Nancy did bingo here, but she played a phony of O-rings for 83 points. And here, Merris makes another very savvy decision. He's up by 1 point, and Nancy has, of course, just drawn the Q. Merris is almost positive that O-rings is not a word, but as I mentioned before, all he needs to do to clinch the tournament is win this game. He doesn't really care how many points he wins by for spread at this point. And Merris knows that if he challenges and somehow he's wrong and O-rings turns out to be a word, then he's actually going to lose, because Nancy is no longer Q-stuck. The play of O-rings has opened an I, and if Merris challenges and is wrong and loses his turn, Nancy is just going to play out with QI for 21 and win this game quite easily. So, on the off chance that he's somehow wrong, Merris deliberately lets O-rings stay on the board. And the idea here is that while Nancy now does have a Q spot, she still only has 1. So all Merris needs to do here is block Nancy from playing QI, and he's going to win the game and the tournament. Actually, Merris's most straightforward path to victory, as I mentioned before, is to just bingo out with obscener, but it's a pretty tricky word to see, and it turns out that he didn't see it, but he did all he needed to do, which is play B for 16 points, blocking Nancy from playing the Q. Nancy, of course, had to pass, and here, Merris plays off not all of his tiles. He could go out with something like Nakers for 10, but as I said before, Nancy isn't playing this Q, so Merris might as well take his time. He plays Corn for 21. Nancy, of course, passes again, and here, Merris gets a little more point spread for himself. He could again go out with something like Jutes, but he first plays Jute for 11 because he's going to get more points playing Jute and then Jutes, since he'll get the value of the J twice. So another really smart play by Merris. Again, spread didn't really matter too much, but you know, at the end of the day, you still want to get as many points as you can. And Nancy passes, and Merris finally goes out with Jutes and wins this game by quite a big margin when all is said and done, 458 to 377. So as we see once again, guys, a Q-stick makes a huge difference and leads to nearly an 80-point swing in the endgame. The score was basically tied after Nancy's bingo, and Merris finishes with an 81-point win. So really awesome stuff here. Major congrats to Merris on his amazing performance in this Charlottesville tournament. Super, super impressive stuff from him, and especially this game, I think, was the highlight. Not only was it his tournament clinching game, but just an absolute masterclass of strategy here, taking advantage of the opportunity to pass really, really nicely and guaranteeing himself the win without really having to do any calculation or incur any stress that some of the other variations would incur. So awesome stuff here. Like I said, major congrats to Merris. Hope you guys found this video enjoyable and educational. Let me know what you think. As always, really appreciate all your comments, and thank you all so much for your support, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.